Good evening, and welcome to Doctorpiece Theater. My name is Dr. Dennis Business, and tonight we will continue our dive into the second of the short stories contained within the pages of the Bachman books, The Long Walk. When we last left Ray Garrity and our friends on the road, Ray made it to Jan and his mother, and he would have died in front of Jan and his mother if it wasn't for mcvries pulling him along. Tubbins is made out of diamonds, he's acting like an asshole, and everybody else is pretty much insane. It's approximately noon. They've gone through Portland and South Portland, and they are only 44 miles from the New Hampshire border. And that is where we begin today, with Chapter 16. Tubbins had gone insane. Tubbins was a short boy with glasses and a face full of freckles. He wore hip-hanging blue jeans that he had been constantly hitching up. He hadn't said much, but he had been a nice enough sort before he went insane. "Whore!" Tubbins babbled to the rain. He had turned his face up to it, and the rain dripped off his specs onto his cheeks, over his lips, and down off the end of his blunted chin. "The whore of Babylon has come among us. She lies in the streets and spreads her legs on the filth of the cobblestones. Vile! Vile! Beware the whore of Babylon. Her lips drip honey, but her heart is gall and wormwood. And she's got the clap," Cauli Parker added tiredly. "Jesus, he's worse than Klingerman." He raised his voice. "Drop down dead, Tubby! Whoremonger and whoremaster!" shrieked Tubbins. "Vile! Unclean!" "Piss on him," Parker muttered. "I'll kill him myself if you don't shut up." He passed trembling skeletal fingers across his lips, dropped them down to his belt, and spent 30 seconds making them undo the clip that held his canteen to his belt. He almost dropped it getting it to his mouth, and then spilled half of it. He began to weep, weakly. It was 3 in the afternoon. Portland and South Portland were behind them. About 15 minutes ago they had passed under a wet and flapping banner that proclaimed that the New Hampshire border was only 44 miles away. Only, Garrity thought. Only. What a stupid little word that is. Who is the idiot who took it into his head that we needed a stupid little word like that? He was walking next to mcvries, but mcvries had spoken only in monosyllables since Freeport. Garrity hardly dared speak to him. He was indebted again, and it shamed him. It shamed him because he knew he would not help mcvries if the chance came. Now Jan was gone. His mother was gone, irrevocably, and for eternity, unless he won. Now he wanted to win very badly. It was odd. This was the first time he could remember wanting to win. Not even at the start, when he had been fresh, back when dinosaurs walked the earth, had he constantly wanted to win. There had only been the challenge. But the guns didn't produce little red flags with bang written on them. It wasn't baseball or giant step. It was all real. Or had he known it all along? His feet seemed to hurt twice as badly since he had decided he wanted to win. And there were stabbing pains in his chest when he drew long breaths. The sensation of fever was growing. Perhaps he had picked something up from Scram. He wanted to win, but not even mcvries could carry him over the invisible finish line. He didn't think he was going to win. In the 6th grade, he had won his school spelling bee and had gone on to the district spell down. But the district spellmaster wasn't Miss Petrie, who let you take it back. Soft-hearted Miss Petrie. He had stood there, hurt, unbelieving. Sure, there must have been some mistake, but there had been none. He just hadn't been good enough to make the cut then. And he wasn't going to be good enough now. Good enough to walk most of them down, but not all. His feet and legs had gone beyond numb, an angry rebellion. And now mutiny was just a step away. Only 3 had gone down since they left Freeport. One of them had been the unfortunate Klingerman. Garrity knew what the rest of them were thinking. It was too many tickets issued for them to just quit. Any of them. Not with only 20 left to walk over. They would walk now until their bodies or minds shook apart. "Did your girl look good to you?" It was Abraham, looking like a victim of the Baton March. For some inconceivable reason, he had shucked both his jacket and his shirt, leaving his bony chest and stacked ribcage bare. "Yeah," Garrity said. "I hope I can make it back to her." Abraham smiled. "Hope? Yeah, I'm beginning to remember how to spell that word, too." It was like a mild threat. Was that Tubbins? Garrity listened. He heard nothing but the steady roar of the crowd. "Yeah, by God it was. Parker put the hex on him, I guess." "I keep telling myself," Abraham said, "that all I gotta do is continue putting one foot in front of the other." "Yeah." Abraham looked distressed. "Garrity, this is a bitch to say." "What's that?" Abraham was quiet for a long time. His shoes were big heavy Oxfords that looked horrendously heavy to Garrity, whose feet were now bare, cold, and scraping raw. They clopped and dragged on the pavement, which had now expanded to 3 lanes. The crowd did not seem so loud or quite so terrifyingly close, as it had ever since Augusta. Abraham looked more distressed than ever. "It's a bitch. I just don't know how to say it." Garrity shrugged, bewildered. "I guess you just say it." "Well, look, we're getting together on something. All of us that are left. Scrabble, maybe? It's kind of a promise." "Oh, yeah? No help for anybody. Do it on your own, or don't do it." Garrity looked at his feet. He wondered how long it had been since he was hungry, and he wondered how long it would be before he fainted if he didn't eat something. He thought that Abraham's Oxfords were like Stebbins. Those shoes could carry him from here to the Golden Gate Bridge without so much as a busted shoelace. At least they looked that way. "That sounds pretty heartless," he said finally. "It's gotten to be a pretty heartless situation." Abraham just looked at him. "Have you talked to the others about this?" "Not yet. About a dozen." "Yeah, it's a real bitch. I can see how hard it is for you to talk about." "Seems to get harder rather than easier." "What did they say?" He knew what they said. What were they supposed to say? "They're all for it." Garrity opened his mouth and then shut it. He looked at Baker up ahead. Baker was wearing his jacket and it was soaked. His head was bent. One hip swayed and jutted awkwardly. His left leg had stiffened up quite badly. "Why'd you take off your shirt?" he asked Abraham suddenly. "It was making my skin itch. It was raising hives or something. It was a synthetic. Maybe I have an allergy to synthetic fibers. How the hell should I know?" "What do you say, Ray?" You look like a religious penitent or something. What do you say? Yes or no? Maybe I owe McVries a couple. McVries was still close by, but it was impossible to tell if he could hear their conversation over the din of the crowd. Come on, McVries, he thought. Tell him I don't owe you anything. Come on, you son of a bitch. But McVries didn't say anything. All right, count me in, Garrity said. Cool. Now I'm an animal. Nothing but a dirty, tired, stupid animal. You did it. You sold it out. If you try to help anybody, we can't hold you back. That's against the rules, but we'll shut you out, and you'll have broken your promise. I won't try. Same goes for anyone who tries to help you. All right, it's nothing personal. You know that, Ray. But we're down against it now. Root hog or die, right? That's right. Nothing personal. Just back to the jungle. For a second, he thought Abraham was going to get pissed, but his quickly drawn-in breath came out in a harmless sigh. Maybe he was too tired to get pissed. You agreed. I'll hold you to that, Ray. Maybe I should get all high-flown and say I'll keep my promise because my word is my bond, Garrity said, but I'll be honest. I want to see you get that ticket, Abraham. The sooner, the better. Abraham licked his lips. Yeah. Those look like good shoes, Abe. Yeah, they're good, but they're too goddamn heavy. You buy for distance, you gain the weight. There just ain't no cure for the summertime blues, is there? Abraham laughed. Garrity watched McVries. His face was unreadable. He might have heard, he might not have. The rain fell in steady, straight lines. Heavier now, colder. Abraham's skin was fish-belly white. Abraham looked more like a convict with his shirt off. Garrity wondered if anyone had told Abraham he didn't stand a dog's chance in lasting the night with his shirt off. Twilight already seemed to be creeping in. McVries? Did you hear us? I sold you down the river, McVries. Musketeers forever. I don't want to die this way, Abraham said. He was crying. Not in public, with people rooting for you to get up and walk another few miles. It's so fucking mindless. It's just fucking mindless. This has just about as much dignity as a mongoloid idiot strangling his own tongue and shitting his pants at the same time. It was 3:15 when Garrity gave his no-help promise. By 6 that evening, only one more had gotten a ticket. No one talked. There seemed to be an uncomfortable conspiracy afoot to ignore the last fraying inches of their lives, Garrity thought, to just pretend it wasn't happening. The groups, what pitiful little remained of them, had broken down completely. Everyone had agreed to Abraham's proposal. McVries had, Baker had, Tubbins had laughed and asked Abraham if he wanted to prick his finger so he could sign in blood. It was growing very cold. Garrity began to wonder if there really was such a thing as a sun, or if he had just dreamed it. Even Jan was a dream to him now, a summer dream of a summer that never was. Yet he seemed to see his father even more clearly. His father with the heavy shock of hair he himself had inherited, and the big, meaty truck driver shoulders. His father had been built like a fullback. He could remember his father picking him up, swinging him dizzyingly, rumpling his hair, and kissing him, loving him. He hadn't really seen his mother back there in Freeport at all, he realized sadly, but she had been there, in her shabby black coat. For Best, the one that showed the white snowfall of dandruff on the collar no matter how often she shampooed. He had probably hurt her deeply by ignoring her in favor of Jan. Perhaps he had even meant to hurt her. But that didn't matter now. It was past. It was the future that was unraveling, even before it was knit. You get in deeper, he thought. It never gets shallower, just deeper, until you're out of the bay and swimming into the ocean. Once all of this had looked simple. Pretty funny, all right. He had talked to mcvries, and mcvries had told him the first time he had saved him out of pure reflex. Then, in Freeport, it had been to prevent an ugliness in front of a pretty girl he would never know. Just as he would never know Scram's wife, heavy with child. Garrity had felt a pang at the thought, and sudden sorrow. He had not thought of Scram in such a long time. He thought mcvries was quite grown up, really. He wondered why he hadn't managed to grow up any. The walk went on. Towns marched by. He fell into a melancholy, oddly satisfying mood that was shattered quite suddenly by an irregular rattle of gunfire and hoarse screams from the crowd. When he looked around, he was stunned to see Cauli Parker standing on top of the half-track with a rifle in his hands. One of the soldiers had fallen off and lay staring up at the sky with empty, expressionless eyes. There was a neat blue hole surrounded by a corona of powder burns in the center of his forehead. "You goddamn bastards!" Parker was screaming. The other soldiers had jumped from the half-track. Parker looked out over the stunned walkers. "Come on, you guys! Come on, we can—" The walkers, Garrity included, stared at Parker as if he had begun to speak in a foreign language. And now one of the soldiers, who jumped when Parker swarmed up the side of the track, now carefully shot Cauli Parker in the back. "Parker!" mcvries screamed. It was as if he alone understood what had happened, and a chance that might have been missed. "Oh no, Parker!" Parker grunted, as if someone had hit him in the back with a padded Indian club. The bullet mushroomed, and there was Cauli Parker, standing on top of the half-track with his guts all over his torn khaki shirt and blue jeans. One hand was frozen in the middle of a wide, sweeping gesture, as if he was about to deliver an angry philippic. "God damn," Parker said. He fired the rifle he had wrenched away from the dead soldier twice into the road. The slugs snapped and whined, and Garrity felt one of them tug air in front of his face. Someone in the crowd screamed in pain. Then the gun slid from Parker's hands. He made an almost military half-turn, and then fell to the road where he lay on his side, panting rapidly like a dog that has been struck and mortally wounded by a passing car. His eyes blazed. He opened his mouth and struggled through blood for some coda. "You bast. He died, staring viciously at them as they passed by. "What happened?" Garrity cried out, to no one in particular. "What happened to him?" "He snuck up on him," mcvries said. "That's what happened. He must have known he couldn't make it. He snuck right up behind him and caught him asleep at the switch." mcvries' voice hoarsened. "He wants us all up there with him, Garrity. And I think we could have done it." "What are you talking about?" Garrity asked, suddenly terrified. "You don't know?" mcvries asked. "You don't know?" "Up there with him? What?" "Forget it. Just forget it." mcvries walked away. Garrity had a sudden attack of the shivers. He couldn't stop them. He didn't know what mcvries was talking about. He didn't want to know what mcvries was talking about, or even think about it. The walk went on. By 9 o'clock that night, the rain had stopped, but the sky was starless. No one else had gone down, but Abraham had begun to moan. It was very cold, but no one offered to give Abraham something to wear. Garrity tried to think about it like poetic justice, but it only made him feel sick. The pain within him had turned into a sickness, a rotten, sick feeling that seemed to be growing in the hollows of his body like a green fungus. His concentrate belt was nearly full, but it was all he could do to eat a small tube of tuna paste without gagging. Baker, Abraham, and mcvries. His circle of friends had come down to those three. And Stebbins, if he was anyone's friend. Acquaintance, then, or demigod, or devil, or whatever. He wondered if any of them would be here by morning, and if he would be alive to know. Thinking such things, he almost ran into Baker in the dark. Something clinked in Baker's hands. "What you doing?" Garrity asked. "Huh?" Baker looked up blankly. "What are you doing?" Garrity repeated patiently. "Counting my change." "How much you got?" Baker clinked the money in his cupped hands and smiled. $1.22, he said. Garrity grinned. "A fortune? What are you going to do with it?" Baker didn't smile back. He looked into the cold darkness dreamily. "Get me one of the big ones," he said. His light southern drawl had thickened appreciably. "Get me a lead-lined one with a pink insides and a white satin head pillow." He blinked his empty doorknob eyes. "Wouldn't ever rot then. Not till judgment trump. When we are as we were, clothed in flesh incorruptible." Garrity felt a warm trickle of horror. "Baker? Have you gone nuts, Baker?" "You can't beat it. We uns was all crazy to try. You can't beat the rottenness of it. Not in this world. Lead-lined. That's the ticket. If you don't get a hold of yourself, you'll be dead by morning." Baker nodded. His skin was drawn tight over his cheekbones, giving him the aspect of a skull. "That's the ticket. I wanted to die. Didn't you? Isn't that why?" "Shut up!" Garrity yelled. He had the shakes again. The road sloped sharply up then, cutting off their talk. Garrity leaned into the hill, cold and hot, his spine hurting, his chest hurting. He was sure his muscles would flatly refuse to support him much longer. He thought of Baker's lead-lined box, sealed against the dark millennia, and wondered if it would be the last thing he ever thought of. He hoped not, and struggled for some other mental track. Warnings cracked out sporadically. The soldiers on the half-tracks were back up to the mark, and the one Parker had killed had been unobtrusively replaced. The crowd cheered monotonously. Garrity wondered how it would be to lie in the biggest, dustiest library silence of all, dreaming endlessly. Thoughtless dreams behind gummed-down eyelids, dressed forever in your Sunday suit. No worry about money, success, fear, joy, pain, sorrow, sex, or love. Absolute zero. No father, mother, girlfriend, lover. The dead are orphans. No company but the silence, like a moth's wing. An end to the agony of movement, to the long nightmare of going down the road. The body in peace, stillness and order. The perfect darkness of death. How would that be? Just how would that be? And suddenly, his roiling, agonized muscles, the sweat running down his face, even the pain itself, seemed very sweet and real. Garrity tried harder. He struggled to the top of the hill and gasped raggedly all the way down the far side. At 11:40, Marty Wyman bought his hole. Garrity had forgotten all about Wyman, who hadn't spoken or gestured for the last 24 hours. He didn't die spectacularly. He just lay down and got shot. And someone whispered, "That was Wyman." And someone else whispered, "That's 83, isn't it?" and that was all. By midnight, they were only 8 miles from the New Hampshire border. They passed a drive-in theater, a huge white oblong in the darkness. A single slide blazed from the screen. The management of this theater salutes this year's long walkers. At 12:20 in the morning, it began to rain again, and Abraham began to cough. The same kind of wet, ragged cough that had gotten Scram not long before he bought out. By 1, the rain had become a hard, steady downpour that stung Garrity's eyes and made his body ache with an internal ague. The wind drove at their backs. At 1/4 the hour, Bobby Sledge tried to scutter quietly into the crowd under the cover of the dark and the driving rain. He was holed quickly and efficiently. Garrity wondered if the blonde soldier, who had almost sold him his ticket, had done it. He knew the blonde was on duty. He had seen his face in the glare from the drive-in spotlights. He wished heartily that the blonde had been the one that Parker had ticketed. At 2:20, Baker fell down and hit his head on the paving. Garrity started to go to him without even thinking. A hand, still strong, clamped on his arm. It was McVries. Of course it would have to be McVries. "No," he said, "no more musketeers. Now it's real." They walked on without looking back. Baker collected 3 warnings, and the silence stretched out interminably. Garrity waited for the guns to come down, and when they didn't, he checked his watch. Over 4 minutes had passed. Not long after, Baker walked past him and McVries, not looking at anything. There was an ugly, trickling wound on his forehead, but his eyes looked saner. The vacuous, dazed look was gone. A little before 2 a.m. they crossed into New Hampshire, amid the greatest pandemonium yet. Cannons went off. Fireworks burst in the rainy sky, lighting a multitude that stretched away as far as the eye could see in a crazy fever light. Competing brass bands played martial airs. The cheers were thunder. A great overhead airburst traced the major's face in fire, making Garrity think numbly of God. This was followed by the face of the New Hampshire provost governor, a man known for having stormed the German nuclear base in Santiago nearly single-handedly back in 1953. He had lost a leg to radiation poisoning. Garrity dozed again. His thoughts grew incoherent. Freaky D'Alicio was crouched beneath the rocking chair of Baker's aunt, curled in a tiny coffin. His body was that of a plump Cheshire cat. He was grinning toothily. Faintly, in the fur between his slightly off-center green eyes, were the healed brand marks of an old baseball wound. They were watching Garrity's father being led into an unmarked black van. One of the soldiers flanking Garrity's father was the blonde soldier. Garrity's father was wearing only undershorts. The other soldier looked back over his shoulder, and for a moment Garrity thought it was the major. Then he saw it was Tubbins. He looked back, and then the Cheshire cat with Freaky's head had disappeared. All but the grin, which hung crescently in the air under the rocker like the outside edge of a watermelon. The guns were shooting again. God, they were shooting at him now. He felt the air from that one. It was over. All over. He snapped full awake and took 2 running steps, sending jolts of pain all the way up from his feet to his groin, before he realized they had been shooting at someone else. And the someone else was dead, face down in the rain. "Hail Mary," McVries muttered. "Full of grace," Stebbins said from behind them. He had moved up for the kill, and he was grinning like the Cheshire cat in Garrity's dream. "Help me win this stock car race." "Come on," McVries said. "Don't be such a wise ass." "My ass is no wiser than your ass," Stebbins said solemnly. McVries and Garrity laughed, a little uneasily. "Well," Stebbins said, "maybe a little." Pick him up, put him down, shut your mouth, mcvries chanted. He passed a shaky hand across his face and walked on, eyes straight ahead, his shoulders like a broken bow. One more bought out before 3 o'clock, shot down in the rain and windy darkness as he went to his knees somewhere near Portsmouth. Abraham, coughing steadily, walked in a hopeless glitter of fever, a kind of death glow, a brightness that it made Garrity think of streaking meteorites. He was going to burn up instead of burning out. That's how tight it had gotten now. Baker walked with steady, grim determination, trying to get rid of his warnings before they got rid of him. Garrity could just make him out through the slashing rain, limping along with his hands clutched at his sides. And mcvries was caving in. Garrity was not sure when it had begun. It might have happened in a second, while his back was turned. At one moment, he had still been strong. Garrity remembered the clamp of mcvries' fingers on his lower arm when Baker had fallen. And now he was like an old man. It was unnerving. Stebbins was Stebbins. He went on, like Abraham's shoes. He seemed to be favoring one leg slightly, but it could have been Garrity's imagination. Of the other 10, 5 seemed to have drawn into that special netherworld that Olsen had discovered, one step beyond pain and the comprehension of what was coming to them. They walked through the rainy dark like gaunt ghosts, and Garrity didn't like to look at them. They were the walking dead. Just before dawn, 3 of them went down at once. The mouth of the crowd roared and belched anew with enthusiasm as the bodies spun and thumped like chunks of cut cordwood. To Garrity it seemed like the beginning of a dreadful chain reaction that might sweep through them and finish them all. But it ended. It ended with Abraham crawling on his knees, eyes turned blindly up to the half-track, and the crowd beyond, mindless and filled with confused pain. They were the eyes of a sheep caught in a barbed wire fence. Then he fell on his face. His heavy awkwards drummed fitfully against the wet road, and then stopped. Shortly after, the Aqueous Symphony of dawn began. The last day of the walk came up wet and overcast. The wind howled down the almost empty alley of the road, like a lost dog being whipped through a strange and terrible place. That was chapter 16 of The Long Walk, the second short story contained within the pages of the Bachman books. And we come to it. We are coming up on the end. This is the last night. There are 9 walkers left, and they have all agreed not to help each other, that this was it. They have come to the come down. And we'll deal with that next time. Because this has been Doctorpiece Theater. My name is Dr. Dennis Business. And as always, my friends,